The youth employment subsidy is viewed as one pillar of a multi-pronged approach to addressing and alleviating youth unemployment. I caught up with Scenario Planner Clem Sunter to discuss whether South Africa does need a youth wage subsidy.
One of the interesting things I've done recently is 2 sessions with Western embassies in Pretoria. And I asked them both, did they foresee the Arab Spring? They said no. Then I said, is there a flag you missed? And they both said abnormally high youth unemployment in all the countries affected by the Arab Spring, combined with growing alienation from society by young people, combined with active social networks. So we have all 3 in South Africa. We're one random event from our own version of an Arab Spring. And that's why we need every single measure to bring our youth unemployment rate down from 46%, which is terrible. Only Spain has that kind of rate.
Why hasn't it happened already? Why hasn't there been more disruption? Is the social grant system perhaps cushioning it to some extent? To some extent,
yes. But as I said, we haven't had that random event. We haven't had that iconic moment like you had in Tunisia or in Egypt. And it can happen anywhere in South Africa. And that's why this whole question of a subsidy for young people to gain skills in companies is absolutely critical. And, you know, yes, COSATU can, argue that companies will use it to get cheap labor. But then you actually, you watch it to see whether they're actually doing it. And then you obviously complain. But it is a very important way to go, as is, I think, subsidies for young people to work for NGOs. I was giving a talk this morning for NOAA, which handles children of families affected by HIV/AIDS. They're looking for 1,000 volunteers to go into homes around the country. Those 1,000 volunteers could be young people who would then be trained in the skills of social work and then could go on to other things.
Isn't it also the issue that if you don't have experience, you don't get work? Of course, a low wage experience when you're 18, 19, 20, even if you haven't got a qualification, is of priceless value going into the job market later.
Absolutely. I mean, I always hold out Germany because at 16, Germany has a dual education system where you go academic or technical. And those people who go technical are offered low-wage employment in Germany along with their education. And I feel it could start even sooner than when you end school. But, we should be actually providing that system where you can acquire technical skills, but you will get something. You won't just have to offer your services for free.
If it was done, if it was approved and set in motion, in the nuts and bolts sense, how would it look? How long would it take? How many people would be involved?
Well, I personally feel that there's 2 things, David. There's big business, and you should set, individual CEOs should actually give targets, I personally feel. So Anglo would have to say, this is how many young people we think we could employ in the next 6 months, and you go to every single major company and challenge them to give you a figure. So it can happen very quickly. And then the second thing I would do is I would relax the labour laws for small business, because we have 6 to 9 million small businesses in this country who might be able to take on 1 or 2 extra people, which, if you multiply by 6 million, that would solve the problem. So you'd actually also look at establishing targets for small business, but you would go to each major company, the top 100, and say, how many young people will you employ in the next 6 months as a result of this legislation?
And there is a reward for doing so. There's an official subsidy.
Absolutely.
Tax can also be used.
Yeah.
Apprenticeships, I'm puzzled. One hears different stories, the learnerships that they talk about now. In the old days, you would have an apprentice who went in at 16, 17, learned a trade at a very low wage, learned practical experience from people who were very experienced in it, and came out at the end practically competent, academically qualified. To what extent are we doing that?
Well, I'm afraid to say, David, it fell away to a certain extent after 1994, with a lot of the apprentice training colleges and nurses training colleges and teacher training colleges actually closing down. So we've got to reinstate them. But it absolutely does work. And in a sense, this idea of apprenticing young people...
Because that's what this is, isn't it?
Yeah. It's been going on for the last 100 years.
It's been going on for thousands of years.
Probably thousands of years.
That was the way that worked.
Yeah.
You pass on the skills. When you're young, you don't need too much money. You're not supporting a family. Now, it seems to me this is mom and apple pie, except Cosatu is against it, so there is that split in the ruling alliance. Let's look now, as opposed to in the football analogy, the team we want to pick, but what team will they pick is what we have to consider. How do we break this logjam, this political logjam which is blocking it?
Well, my view, and I've had it for the last year, is we do need an economic codesa. We had codesa 1 and 2 in the early 90s, which solved the political problems. We had a constitution, we had a free and fair election, but we didn't at the same time talk about the economy. So we've got a political democracy, we have not got economic democracy, we haven't got a free and fair economy, we've got a free and fair political system, but we haven't got a free and fair economy. And so I believe that we need the 100 top CEOs plus the government plus the unions to have a very big publicized meeting, out of which comes measurable outcomes to which the CEOs and the government will be held accountable. That is the way we break the logjam.
How close are we to getting that? Because it's been mooted for a couple of years. You've been one of the people suggesting it.
Look, I haven't heard from any official position from government on the idea of an economic codesa. There are 1 or 2 other people in the press who've taken it up and said it would be a good idea. You know, for me, South Africans are very good at negotiating things. There's a spirit of give and take. And I think especially we should have an agridesa, which looks at the whole land issue and how we can actually have a proper program of transforming land ownership in this country, which has a chance of success, which will need the buy-in from the major commercial farmers. So whether it's the major companies providing employment for young people, whether it is how we create a genuine system of restituting land to emerging farmers, we need an economic codesa.
Let's look at the unions. That is the big stumbling point here, Cosatu. Now, in a sense, you can't blame them because they are there to represent the interests of their members, not the poor or the unemployed.
Yes.
However, they appear to have more power than they should. They're not elected. In a way, they have power without responsibility. How do we unlock that logjam?
Well, I don't see the alliance breaking up. So I would like to say to Mr. Varvey, you know, I quite understand your position because you are protecting your workers. Trade unions are part of a modern democracy, so there's nothing wrong with that. But when it comes to policy making, it's not a question of decent work for everybody. It's decent work for some and no work for others. And therefore, there has to be a transition where people either become entrepreneurs and do what they're doing in Nigeria, selling from every street corner, or they join existing businesses. And you should be establishing that kind of midpoint between no work and decent work. That's the only way you're going to employ 5 million extra people by 2020.